Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Burnt-Santy. Very excited. My guest today is Ijumaa Jordan. Hi there.
Hello.
We're laughing because I didn't know what was happening, but I think we've got it figured out now.
Yeah.
Um, finally, I think we tried to record at least once before, and
hmm
it was a while ago. It was when I was making that switch from Skype to Zoom, and somehow I didn't have like your voice at all on my recording, and I felt really bad about that. But we're gonna do it now.
Yes.
Yes, yay. So, Ijuma, tell folks about yourself, what you want them to know, what you're out there doing, whatever you want people to know. We've got all
Well,
the time.
again, my name is Ijumaa Jordan. My title is early childhood consultant. So that means for me that I work with teachers, preschool teachers, infant toddler teachers. I work with leadership and admin. I work with organizations about anything in progressive education.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of anti-racist work. I do a lot of play-based work. I help teachers maybe go from not being play-based to being play-based. I do a lot of culturally responsive, developing appropriate practice, supporting people. I support leaders and supporting their teachers. I help organizations
Mhm.
that are ECE adjacent. So maybe resource and referral agencies, maybe professional organizations, um, with yeah, with all
Yep.
the other things around progressive early education and working
Yeah.
to make this a better world and a
Yeah.
better place for children
Yeah.
and ourselves.
And hooray that you're out there doing that. I continue to learn from you, and so I'm excited that that you're here today to talk to the folks who are listening. So you wrote a piece that was both published in NACY's Young Children magazine, but is also in the latest edition of their developmentally appropriate practice book, and it's called Both and Early Childhood Education Needs Both Play and Equity. So I'm excited to dig into this, but the rules say I have to read a quote first.
Okay, we have to follow the rules
Yep,
right
yep. Just one time we're following rules.
now. Okay.
Okay, so you write, and this is sort of at the end of your discussion, and we'll kind of fill in some of this as we go, but you said the unintentional consequence of more assessments and regulations in early childhood has been the lack of play and more teacher-directed activities to supposedly teach children the skills that will make them ready, make them school ready, and close the achievement gap. I really want to hear you talk about the achievement gap. And then you say these educational reforms applied to children from low-income communities, children of color, and Native American children are restricting their access to self-initiated complex play, which hampers their learning and their healthy development. And so the whole piece here, it's really easy to read, accessible to read.
Yeah.
It's hard thinking while you're reading it, but it's like 4 pages long. So I really encourage people to go find it. We'll link it. Um, but you're making the case that um, sort of in a at least um, nominal effort to increase opportunity
hmm
for children in these marginalized groups that you've listed, we're actually depriving them of play, um, and creating more inequity.
hmm
But the language we use about it is, oh, this is for equity.
Yes.
So that's annoying, right? So will you just talk a little bit about, why you wrote this piece, what
hmm
you think we need to start with here?
Um, I wrote this piece because I think two things. were happening are happening.
Mhm.
I think that um, as professionals and what professional organizations are saying and what people are being trained to do is have play-based curriculum and have and offer play to children, which I think we're in agreement that that should happen. And what also is happening in from anecdotally and from research that Black, Indigenous communities of color are somewhat resistant to that, and wanting more academics
Mhm.
to prepare them, the children, the them as the
Right.
children, for
Right.
K through 12 for
Yeah.
school, because there's a lot of anxiety around children succeeding.
Mhm.
And it's been studied, and there's a lot of language, like the achievement gap.
Yeah.
Um, and there's not hasn't been a lot of critical conversation around what is it exactly we want children to achieve,
Mhm.
right? Because if play is essential for childhood, why is it that in the system that we have now that basically affluent white children get that?
Mhm. Yeah. So yeah, I was just gonna I wanted to ask too, just like what do you think about our persistence, our insistence on using that achievement gap language?
Mm-hmm. I think it's a marketing,
Mhm. Yeah.
just like learning loss, like after you
Yes.
know the panini happened,
Yes.
the learning loss, it's just to sell curriculum. It's just
Mhm.
to sell assessment tool.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
actually not for improving children's lives and well-being.
Yeah.
And in the United States, um, it's actually not policy to support children's right to play, which
Right.
internationally, like the UN, like the rights of children, that children have a right to play.
Mhm.
As Americans, we have not signed off on that.
Right.
Um,
We're the only ones who haven't signed up on it now, I think.
yes. And
Yeah.
so, yeah,
I
we
that
won't get way into politics, but to
Yeah.
think about what we know as early childhood educators, or what I think we should know,
Yeah.
and
Good
what
distinction.
is quote unquote best
Uh-huh.
practice, or however you want to frame it. Um, but what actually do children need to have a fulfilling childhood, to
Mhm.
have this one precious time
Yeah.
to live and to grow in, like, in a time that is exponential growth?
Right.
And it's our responsibility as adults, and it's our ethical responsibility to give them that best experience.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, ethics come into this not often enough. I think let me go backwards. That sentence was really weird. I don't think that we think about ethics enough in conversations about the achievement gap and about equity even and about play certainly. Um, so the reason I refound this article is for some writing I'm doing, and I wanted to make sure that I was including some stuff about equity. And so I found this, and I also found one from Mariana Suto Manning, she's with the Eric
Mhm.
Institute now, I think, and it was called "Is Play a Privilege or a Right?" And
Yeah.
in that piece, she brings out the NACI Code of Ethical Conduct and that first, above all, do no harm. And we
Mhm.
won't take part in practices that are lots of things, but one of the words in there is exploitative or exploitative.
Mhm.
And I think what you're talking about with the achievement gap being a marketing tool to sell curriculum, that's exactly what we're doing. We're exploiting children,
Yeah.
um, whether we intended that way or not.
Mhm.
That's how it's being lived.
Yes, I think that's what's being lived. But we use the language about, like, that's what children need,
Yeah,
right? Like they won't be successful. And that's very scary
yeah,
for families,
yeah.
right? because families,
Because
all
families
families
want the
want their
best.
children to be successful,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
All children want their children to, you know, grow up and be adults and be good adults, have work, have the things that they need,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
To community, to be self-sufficient. And, you know,
Yeah.
because we live in capitalism.
Capitalism and
One of
patriarchy, two common soapbox topics on this show.
yeah, so we
Um,
want children to grow into workers, right? And to be productive.
yeah.
And we get that if we push skills on them
Yeah.
at a very early age,
And those
right?
skills are more measurable than just
Mm-hmm.
a quality of life or a
Yeah.
wonderful childhood
Mm-hmm.
or happiness, or health, those kinds of things. The skills and concepts are more easily measurable. So then it comes back to then, well, then we can sell assessment tools.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so what will you talk a little bit about the two examples or examples you've seen? Because I know it's a long time ago that you wrote this article. But you talk about an more affluent program that you visited, and then one that served more of these um, uh, kind of othered groups that we push out with these conversations. We push out of equity and out of play. Um, but you probably have lots of experience with this, right? Seeing the extremes.
Mm-hmm. I think that one thing that I want to say, and that I don't think people really think about, is that our education system, even our early education system, is very segregated
Yeah.
through race and class.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so,
Everybody go read Casey Stockstill's book, False Starts, about segregation in early childhood. Okay, continue.
and so I think like people think like when I give examples, like those are just extreme examples,
Mhm.
but it's just like the average and what people are experiencing.
Yeah.
It's true in early childhood education, it's true through K through 12, it's true in higher ed.
Mhm.
So, like the funding, you know, just politically, like, oh, they're giving all this money to Head Start to these children that don't really need it.
Mm.
And
They
like,
don't really
well,
need it?
yeah, like they don't really need that money. They don't really need the funding, especially if they're just playing.
Oh, right. See, yes. Uh-huh. Yeah.
But if they're doing skill-based stuff, then that's
Mhm.
what's of value.
Right. Right. Which is capitalism again, right? You can't get something for nothing. If
Right.
we're giving you this money, you better be able to prove that things are happening that we approve of
Yes.
and that we value.
Yes.
And so what seems like it should be a public good
Mm-hmm.
becomes harmful
Yes.
for
And
children.
so my value is that education is a public good and it's a right
Hmm.
that everyone should have equitable access to.
Hmm.
Um, and when I go to different centers and visit and talk with leaders and talk with teachers and just observe, um, there is a gap in having play available,
Hmm.
being child initiated activities, their ideas,
Yeah.
like what.
Yeah. Yeah, let's unpack play a little bit because I know lots of people who think, well, I play because they use
Mhm,
toys instead of worksheets or flashcards, but it's still very discrete skill focused.
mhm.
So when you're talking about play and equity and the play that this group of children doesn't get, you started, but will you talk a little bit more about what that is, what that means?
So thinking about the characteristics that is self-initiated, that
Mhm.
is like the child like wants to do that, that they are, I don't know, like to frame it like there's like joy and like emotionality around it, that is
Uh-huh.
not work,
Yep.
right? Like it's not for to get a result. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's play for play's sake.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
know like it's a better word for that. That's just not coming to my mind right now. That is not interfered with by
Uh-huh.
an adult saying like, oh, you need to do it this way.
Yeah.
That children are like they might be negotiating with the adults about like what the rule of this play is going to be, or negotiating with other children, because that's part of the like the problem solving, the cognitive part of that.
Yeah.
But it's not adult directed,
Yeah.
and it's not for adults to, you know, tick off
Yeah.
on their that. I think I said maybe two or three when I'm thinking about play. I should have had my notes, but I didn't bring any notes.
That's
um,
okay. You're doing great.
and so when children are playing, like they have their own rules,
Mm-hmm.
their own ideas, they're exploring different ideas, like their own reality or their own fantasy play, that it has like their own themes, and that's supported in the environment,
Mm-hmm.
that it's imaginative, that there's usually some kind of pretend,
Yeah.
even with infants and toddlers,
Yeah.
right? See the
Yeah.
beginning of that. Um, yeah, and they are having a good time.
Yeah. And if we had an audience that needed us to connect that to learning that they could recognize, we could do that.
Mhm.
You know, but we also need to be willing to say, we globally, we also need to be willing to say they're just children and they should just get to play. If it's a right, if it's a human right, then you know, it's due to anyone just because they are human, and it's a moral principle that
Yeah.
they should be able to have this. And so what you're talking about here, what I hear you talking about in this conversation is that there's a distinct group who aren't getting that right,
Mhm.
who that right is being withheld from in the name of I mean, they think they're quote unquote doing equity, right? We're trying to get these children on the level with these children, but we need to take a hard look at what those two groups of children look like and where the standard is coming from,
Mhm.
right?
And what we're actually offering them, and what the expectation is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because again, our current system is actually not built for Black children, Indigenous children, children of color, neurodivergent children,
Yeah.
queer children,
Yeah.
right? That the system is built, and the standard is very white normative,
Hmm. Yeah.
with the class expectation, with the white cultural expectation.
Hmm.
And anytime we try to suppress children's cultures that are non-white and non-dominant,
Hmm.
we take that right away from them.
Yeah.
We
So
inhibit their
yeah, I know that kind of thinking was really hard for me to hear. Um, when I first started to hear people say that like quality standards, learning standards are white normative, and something I'm still learning about, like how to articulate. Like I'm there. I'm sold on the idea. I'm just still figuring out how to articulate it myself. But I
Mhm.
wonder if people listening are having that same kind of reaction. Uh,
Probably.
yeah, and so what does it mean? What is it about our typical traditional practices that are white normative?
Mhm. I think it's like what's not.
Yeah, okay.
And so, like, what are some examples? Some examples around how we use time and how we see time.
Yeah.
Um, and that's a cultural norm.
Uh-huh.
the way, so in white dominant culture, time is linear, right? There's a clock that
We got to move through the day.
and we move through
Get
the day
all the scheduled pieces.
on this schedule, right? That you need to be on time. That if we start at 9 o'clock, then everyone needs to be here at 8:50, 8:45.
Yeah.
Ready for whatever it is. And even though that's like the narrative, how it's enforced is so like in Head Start programs, but like parents and families are penalized if they don't bring their child, like, oh, you don't get breakfast, don't get, we mark you off for that. You could lose your childcare, like getting there on time.
Yeah.
And I go to affluent and higher income play-based places, kids rolling up in there 1 o'clock in their pajamas with their lovey under their shoulders.
Yeah.
Like,
and oh, how cute is that?
Like, I'm here.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
oh, welcome.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nobody says anything.
No. And I think that's one of, as a college teacher, one of the things I struggle to just even facilitate discussion about, but a lot of times we hear, or the students hear, well, we need to, part of being developmentally appropriate is understanding the social and the cultural context that the child comes to us from, and how we can be inclusive with that. And so often in practice, I see, or in discussion, I hear it being, that means I need to understand their culture so that I can bring them closer to my culture. I'll meet them where they are, but I'm still wanting to bring them to me, instead of, boy, I might really need to change some big things in the way I go through my day if I'm really going to be like culturally inclusive.
Yeah, because we're brought up that dominant culture is the right. It's not just dominant, it's the right.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't I want to bring children closer to the right thing?
Yeah.
Even if it's not my culture, right? But the culture in school is based on dominant culture, and we want children to be successful.
Yeah.
So then, like, they have to learn that. Like, yeah, that's cute. Like, wear your little cultural stuff.
Yeah.
You need to act like this.
Yeah. 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 It's just too easy to slip into that script than to be really so like when I talk about me still struggling to articulate or to really feel like I understand it, it's because I have so much of my own stuff that comes into question if I start to say, oh, do I really need to relook at my schedule because so many of these families and children are showing me that their interaction with time is different than mine, that's so many layers I have to work through.
But also,
but you have to be,
it can be a place negotiation, right?
Yeah.
So if you're in a food program, and the food program is that we pay you when you have for breakfast during this time and this time. Right?
Yeah.
And when we come and assess and visit to make sure that you're spending this money right, we want to see children sitting at the table, eating that food during that time. And so if you have families that like work different schedules and come, in a 3-hour gap and not in that hour, 90 minutes, maybe 2 hour, you serve breakfast.
Yeah.
Like that's a real issue. Like if you you can say, well, I just need to do this to be culturally responsible. That's being irresponsible. Right? Like you need to negotiate that, right? You need to tell parents that this is like, these are the rules for this program. These are the rules. So we need to figure out either, we need to figure out what to do. Sometimes we figured out that when you leave the day before, I'm gonna send you a packet with the breakfast. So then, like, I know that they're fed, you know that they're fed,
Uh-huh.
and I don't, we don't have to go through that.
Yeah.
Sometimes, like, you ask parents, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we can do that," and they get there,
Uh-huh.
right?
Right.
And so, thinking about, instead of like trying to punish families, instead of punishing children, thinking about how can we negotiate and make this work, right? Because if, like, we need this funding and we need to
Mhm.
make it work. And as I can, like, go back and negotiate, with the funders or whatever, but in the meantime, we need to make this work.
Yeah. Yeah. And that forces me to think about, why am I really holding this rule? Or
Mm-hmm.
or why am I bothered that we don't have the same idea about this rule? So it brings me back to kind of making potentially implicit biases explicit, so that I can work through them or deal with
Yeah.
them, or hold myself accountable for that.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it is just, well, we can't run our center if we don't have any money for food. So this is why I want them here earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But there's always that possibility that there's something um, less black and white.
Yeah. And I think it's also reflecting on um like the biases that we know, like those explicit bias, and then, like, oh, I might have some implicit bias
Yeah.
here also. And also, a lot of times we need to confront um this idea of a savior mentality,
Yeah.
right? Because we think, like, no, well, we should make sure that families are coming in on time, because what if they, when they have a job or they have to show up in school on time, like,
Yeah.
right, bringing them to
Yep.
dominant culture instead of, like, what's working for this family, like, are we
Yeah.
being of service,
Yeah. Yeah.
like, what is our actual moral ethical responsibility, right? Like, we're not going to feed children because of a rule.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
If you're saying it, say it. Like, if that's what you're saying, just say it. Yeah.
Or you're just trying to punish them because you feel like they don't actually know how to raise their children, right?
Yep.
And
Yeah.
so, like, this work really does require us cause us to be our best selves,
hmm
to be our most ethical selves, to be our most moral selves, and
Yeah.
not let the rules be an excuse to punish or to harm
Right.
children and families.
Right. So, I want to use that hook onto harm, that the harm that you just mentioned, and kind of bring this back to play, and how equity and play are related here, because that word harm makes it hard for us to have real conversations sometimes. We'll sort of shut down to protect ourselves if anyone suggests that something we're doing could be harming children. But it's right there at the beginning. Above all, we shall do no harm. There's also, we're not gonna engage in practices that are disrespectful. And I think that fits into this play inequity
Mm-hmm.
conversation. Emotionally damaging is also in that statement. Um, so would you talk a little bit about potential harm of the inequity of some children being able to play and some children not being able to play? You've touched on it, of course, through the whole
Yeah.
thing, but
Um, that is harmful to be oppressed and not being
yeah.
able to be our full self,
hmm
right? Because I don't know, maybe you don't remember, like, the freedom of play
Yeah.
as a, like, that freedom and just the wonder and, like, the regulation,
hmm
the friendships that you build, and allowing that to happen in a safe environment,
hmm
in an environment that is like made for you and like what ideas you could have. It also thinking about not just individual benefits, but also like community. Like the joy and play bonds and brings communities together.
Yeah.
And so we want like a community of learners, right? A community to help us grow and develop. Like taking away play doesn't get us there.
Yeah.
Right? Because who wants to show up for another another what is this? What is this?
Yeah.
How many thoughts do you have?
Yeah, I think there's something in sort of exploring the words teaching and learning too. I mean, you talked about you know, children are learning when they play, and it's how they're built to learn, and it's how they learn best because of lots of factors that you've talked about, the joy and the community and the connection and the curiosity and creativity. But it's sort of challenging for the adult then, because well, if they're playing, well, how am I a teacher? What do I do with my ego that needs to be a teacher? And especially if we connect that to sort of savior efforts, it's really, really hard to let go.
Yeah, it is. And we have to. Right? Like there's no like middle ground with that, because children are going to resist that.
Yeah.
And so like thinking about what's my role in supporting play? What's my role in supporting children's development? And if we are keen observers and we actually value, we can like delight and figure out like, well, what can I do to support that? Not necessarily like, well, what's my idea to give to them?
Right.
Well, how can I support their thinking?
Yeah.
Around this.
It still requires us to have some expertise.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because we're still the adult. We still have all this experience, and like, you know, maybe we took a couple of classes, right? And so play inherently creates problems to solve. Right?
Yeah.
Even in our imaginations, even like when we're like building blocks, when we're like pretending and like you're the mommy, you're the daddy, right? Or I'm the mommy and here's the other mommy and here's like, right?
Yeah.
So thinking about like they've been on this earth 1, 2, 4 months, right? 3 years. So they don't have the experience. So they're just like whatever coming up in their mind, whatever they've seen and experienced.
Yeah.
And so then you have, you know, some ideas around that. And so helping them figure out like, well, what is the next step? What can I do to make this work?
Yeah.
Or just sit and like, you know what, we're never going to solve that. I don't know.
Which is part of learning, right? That's real. Yeah. I think, you know, I think it's also disrespectful to teachers to put them in these spaces and say, I don't care what you think or know or were trained in. Here's your schedule and here's your curriculum and here's your rules. And I think that can also have harmful effects on the adults in the space.
Absolutely.
That we need.
And it's also like thinking about if they can give us all of that, that's also around pay equity, right? Because we don't have to pay you if you don't actually have to think, and we just have to give you teacher-proof stuff.
Yeah.
So when we accept that, we devalue ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. So if someone is listening and they're like, wait, I'm in one of those programs, that is how they tell us to do it. And yeah, my kids don't get to play. What can we offer them? Other than the
So I
fact that
think
everyone's hired.
one, like, don't just go quit your job.
Yeah,
Right?
right.
Like,
Yeah.
don't write the header, write to me talking about, yeah, I brought that up and I got fired, or I
Yeah.
just quit
I'm
and
not
I
going to sign your resignation letter.
don't do that. So I think, like, if you're realizing, like, oh, and you want it to change, like, you have to think, like, well, do I want something
Yeah.
different?
Yeah.
And
Some people don't. I mean, that's the
yeah,
reality too.
and that
Yeah.
if it doesn't bother you, like, I don't know what you're talking about, Ijumaa, fine.
Yeah.
Then you could probably go listen to a different episode.
Yeah. I don't know that any of these episodes are going to be for that person, but okay, yes.
But if you're here,
Yeah.
right? So I think that, starting with whatever's in your power to change.
Mm-hmm.
Like, before you go say, I'm not going to do this curriculum, da 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 da.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, what is actually in my control that I can make a shift around?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's discovering that you actually do have power and influence.
Right.
And so sometimes it's starting to discover what that is
Mm-hmm.
and start to make that change.
Mm-hmm.
And also, like, this isn't just like you against the world. Like, you should, like, find community.
Mm-hmm.
You should have, like, thinking partners and other people to support you as you try to make this transition.
Mm-hmm.
Ideally, your co-teacher,
Yeah.
or someone in your program. Maybe it's someone outside locally.
Yeah.
Maybe it's, like, I don't know, me or you.
Yeah.
Like, virtually.
Yeah.
Like, be in community.
Yeah.
And, like, talking with people and figuring out, like, what, and little by little,
Mm-hmm.
and then thinking about, well, what can I do to come together with people and start changing the system?
Mm-hmm. Which feels much harder.
Yeah.
But that's where that community can be really valuable.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because, again, it's not you against the world.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I was just trying to think because I've worked twice for a chain that had the curriculum that came down from, somebody on the other side of the country that all the 2-year-olds in the world had to do that day. And one of the things that one of the changes I could make was even just to, you have to do that thing in the morning when they say, but then you can leave those materials out for the repetition children need and the choice that they can then, we'll do it your way for the 10 minutes that it takes to do that activity. I have this whole rest of the day to keep this stuff out for you to explore it in the way that you want to, the way that you're curious or not to,
Right.
and to repeat it. And so there's, even if it's just like a little shift like that, it can make a real difference to your day.
And thinking about, like, what are the rules of my classroom, right? Like, what can shift
Mm-hmm.
to make more space and more time
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
to do that? What relationships can I build with my director? How can I document, right, these changes
Yeah.
and the quote unquote improvement that they've made? Like, how
Yeah.
the children benefited.
Yeah. Yeah. I read a phrase in one of the other pieces I was reading in this part of my research about becoming photo activists.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was because I do that, but it's such a cool way of relabeling it so it feels more important. So so it's more acceptable, I guess, as real advocacy. But yeah, taking photos of the times of day that aren't scripted.
Mm-hmm.
And doing some sort of display that attaches value to that
Right.
unscripted moment.
And for you to learn, right?
Right.
To be able to analyze and to, like,
Yep.
make your case.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
For
it's also a professional development activity for
yeah.
you as you go through that process. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, finding the right professional development for you that's going to help you achieve those goals and making those shifts.
There's a lot of it out there.
It is.
Lots of options. Finding you, yeah, in all the different places you are doing that kind of thing.
And I think like being community also can help you like regulate like those emotions.
Yes.
Because I think like our ego gets in the way, we feel guilty.
For sure.
Like, you know, like when we say harm, like those things are harmful. I think people, this is gonna go in a different way.
Okay.
But I think its base thing is around Christianity and sin. And all sins are the same. And so, oh, I did, you know, I'm not letting children pay, and I'm like doing this terrible harm, and I have to repent. Like, don't spiral that way, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Like, we're not, this isn't asking for perfection. We're human, we make mistakes. And so once we see that mistake, then that's where our ethics come in, right? It's our ethical responsibility to make the correction.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
To repair the harm.
Yeah. Because that is part of it too. When you're unraveling this, you have the guilt, or so you're saying, I've been harming children. My whole life has been about helping children, you know, saying it in that way because I've gone through that journey myself. Yeah. And we just keep moving, right? We reflect and we learn and we think, okay, so next time, what might I do?
So there's the next time.
Yeah. Or what do I need to learn more about? Or which child do I need to spend more time noticing? All that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And again, like you're taking your power, you're owning your own power, right? You're providing your own professional development, you're being community, and like that feels good, right? Because you're not alone.
Yeah.
You're not like with all those scary, guilty feelings.
Yeah.
Because it's not actually productive, it's not getting you closer.
Right.
Because if we stay in that guilt and we stay in that shame, then we're going to keep making those mistakes because we're going to get defensive and then maybe do worse.
Right. Or freeze and just sort of check out and let.
And then the same thing just keeps happening.
Yeah.
And then you're just like,
yeah,
I just did what they said.
Yeah. Well, the good news is that I keep hearing from lots and lots of people who really want to do this kind of work. And so I know that there is community out there.
Yes.
It just may be harder to find. You may have to be pretty proactive. It might not be that they just hire someone in your classroom with you who suddenly is your beautiful, like-minded soulmate. You might have to go do a little looking, but they're out there, and it is really heartening when you find it. Yeah. What else do you want to say about this? Anything that you were really hoping I'd ask you, or that you wanted to say that we haven't gotten around to yet? Yeah. I mean, really, I don't want to interrupt. But the very last sentence you write, the goal is to move play back to the center of childhood experiences for all children. I felt like was a powerful one sentence that had so much power at the end of the piece. Yeah,
I think, again, like repeating myself around, like actually understanding what play is and what that looks like. Building back up our own value and valuing for our adult life, right? Because play should be for your whole human experience and practice. And sometimes we have to heal that part.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And allow ourselves like that perfectionism, right? Because we think like we have to be perfect.
Right.
We have to like do this exact way, and then no mistakes will be made, but that's just not realistic.
Right.
and that's actually harming our own selves.
Mm-hmm.
And that harms children, because if they don't ever see us make mistakes, then they're going to feel like bad and ashamed
Yeah.
when they make mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah. I just think the more we can bring authentic human relationships into the work, understanding that children are humans and we are humans, and you know, we have things that guide us, and we have goals we hope for, um, you know, and we have all our visions and our mission statements and all that stuff. But in the end, we're all just human beings together. Um, and that's messy. um, and imperfect.
Mm-hmm.
And that's hard for some of us.
Yeah.
Looking right at me in my little Zoom box, that's hard for some of us.
And I think that accepting and learning, by thinking about play, that play is always happening in a cultural context.
Mm-hmm.
And this idea that we have to like know exactly about like other people's cultures before we can move or do anything, when a lot of times like we have to accept like, oh, how is this different, like how am I feeling about it, and like how do we incorporate that? How is that possible?
Right. Yeah.
Or and
there's
also like that self-reflection, am I just trying to push on a cultural norm that's actually not what needs to happen right now?
Yeah. Which requires us to slow down and notice how children are playing. And the ideas that they're sharing with us through their play, which is also really hard to do, especially if you're in one of those super scripted settings, or a setting where you have all kinds of documentation you feel like you need to be working on all the time. But that deep noticing.
Like that deep noticing. And like you don't, again, that perfectionism, right? You're not, sometimes you don't know. And like you, like, I don't even know how to interpret that. Like what's happening here?
But I think the wondering is the important thing, for me at least, like that. At least I stopped and noticed, and I'm wondering now, instead of just shutting it down or labeling it, or just thinking it's weird.
Yeah, like thinking about, oh, am I just judging this?
Yes. Yeah.
And so like, oh, that's different. And sometimes like you don't know like why, and you never like get to that place. But then you think about, is this harmful, right? Is this like an idea that actually is helping? Like how can, like if I support this, like what might happen next? And a lot of times like it'll be fine.
Yeah.
And so one, like an idea, a story that just came up to me, there was a center, predominantly white, a white teacher, was having a very hard time with a Chinese American 3-year-old boy. Something had happened, like they used to be like you could take off your shoes in the classroom. But they had like the fire marshal came.
I was gonna say the fire marshal must have come through.
Yeah. And you know, like, oh no, the children should have their shoes on all the time, da 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 da. So they started to like make the children like wear their shoes inside. And like at first they were trying to make them like sleep with them on.
Yeah, that's the worst.
So then like everybody's shoes are next to their cot or whatever. But the Chinese American boy, he was used to that, and that's like at home, like you don't wear shoes inside. And so no matter what, it was just always
off.
Like he come in, take his shoes off, put them in his cubby. and somebody would like be behind him. And I was
Uh-huh.
like, so what kind of relationship do you want?
Oh boy, yeah. Hmm.
Because the fire marshal isn't here. And when the fire marshal comes back, it's not going to be that fire marshal.
Yeah.
More than likely.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you have to be here every day, right? And like you want to like say like, no, this cultural norm is wrong or bad when it's not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because if something happens, like he weighs like maybe 15 pounds, and if it's an emergency, like you're scooping him up, grabbing his shoes, and you're out of there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And
So
it's yeah, that's such a real example. Like everyone listening related to that one the hardest of anything that we said. The fire marshal coming through.
and so thinking, and that's how like we just accept like dominant cultural norms or whoever's in authority of power,
Mm-hmm.
and not actually like how is this going to affect us, how is this going to affect our relationship, how is this going to affect what we're trying to grow and do here.
Right.
Like have some boundaries and like say
Right.
no.
And think about the impact on that child's identity development
Mhm.
when something that's so core and so important is
Yeah.
now framed as misbehavior or something
Mm-hmm.
that makes the teachers annoyed or
Yeah.
is potentially putting him in harm's way.
Mm-hmm.
However we frame that, there's a risk um, in there, which ties into the relationship conversation.
And so those are the things that happen all
Yeah.
the time, every day, and we can make those choices.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're almost at an hour. How did that happen? I guess I have to deduct a few minutes for the link sending mishap that was off mic at the beginning, but I probably should wrap the episode up. I will include in the episode description some places to find this article and to find your work. But is there anything you want to share for people who want to find out more about you and the work?
You can follow me on my social media. I haven't been as active because life and
Yeah.
other stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this summer I'll be more a little bit more active. I have a group and we're doing some abolition work.
Wow.
That's very controversial right now.
Yeah. So I'm glad you're doing it. Yeah.
Because
Yeah. We'll help connect folks with you.
So if you're interested in that, and I'll be having a workshop on August 25th around police free ECE and have some teachers talking about some abolition work that they're doing in the classroom and thinking about how that can impact ECE and thinking about punishment and classroom rules. So that's my focus for this summer. I'm also thinking about having a community of practice for the fall and winter for leaders. Like you can be a teacher leader, you can be a consultant, you can
Not necessarily bosses, but
right. But thinking about building that intentional community and bringing people together. That's the other offering that I'm going to have. And then I'll be maybe at some conferences.
Yeah. It will be conference season before we know it, right?
It'll be conference season, so I'll be around.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I really, really appreciate you taking time to have this conversation and appreciate the writing that led to the conversation. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome. And if anybody has any other questions, like you read it and like you want to talk about, feel free to contact me.
Awesome. Yeah, that's generous. Yay. I hope that they do. Maybe I will be. All right, so thank you again. This is where I do my awkward wrap up and I don't really end the show on time. But thank you all for listening. Thank you, Ijumaa, for being here.
You're welcome.
And we'll be back again next week with another episode.
Bye.
Bye.